Let's take a quick check on the Philippine markets on this last trading day of the week. The PSCI opens this Holy Wednesday slightly lower by nearly 0.2%, 6,175 to be exact. The stock market closed yesterday Tuesday higher by 0.6%. Let's take a look at the Philippine peso that has opened slightly weaker as you see it at 56.82 the dollar. Peso closed yesterday stronger at 56.77 against the greenback. The markets are closed on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, both regular holidays, and trading resumes on April 21st. Bangko Sentral Governor Eli Remolona told me on this program last Friday the trickier part of the April 10 Monetary Board policy decision was how many more local rate cuts were coming for the rest of this year. For more than inflation or the lack thereof was the threat of slower economic growth because of the global policy uncertainty.
We're looking at slower growth, which is kind of a first in the last few years. And then we're looking at lower inflation, which is kind of good news. It gives us more degrees of freedom. There's risk that we will see lower growth than before.
So if that's the case, would maybe 5%, 5.5% be the lower end of the band then?
I'd say more like 5.2, but not less than that. We're still hoping for 6.
BMI's country risk team maintains its forecast that the Bangko Sentral will further lower rates by 50 basis points to 5% across this year. With us now for more from Singapore is Damien Yeo, Senior Consumer and Retail Analyst at Fitch Solutions Unit BMI in Singapore. Good to see you, Damien. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Kai. Thanks for having me.
So BMI got its forecast right. The 25 basis point cut by the Bangko Sentral last April 10th. After hearing from Governor Eli Remolona last week, are you holding out for further cuts this year?
Yeah. For now, our country risk team is maintaining our forecast that the BSP will further lower rates by 50 basis points to 5% across 2025. There is, of course, certainly room for revision of this figure, particularly if we consider the potential impact of how U.S. protectionist policies will evolve. But since everything is effectively in flux at the moment, we will need to hold and watch further. In fact, I believe this morning it was reported that the Philippines will be sending a delegation to the U.S. next month to negotiate the tariffs. So as you can see, everything is still very much in the works. But what we can say with confidence is that the BSP will probably look for another 25 basis points cut at the next meeting that's scheduled for June 19th.
Right. So what kind of inflation projections then are you basing the 50 basis point cut for the full year with inflation in March slowing to a 5-year low?
Yeah, so as you said, the reason why we're confident is because there is inflation in the Philippines have been relatively subdued. As you mentioned earlier, having eased to a near 5-year low of 1.8% in March of 2025. And over the rest of 2025, BMI projects that inflation in the Philippines will average about 2.6%. And this is, of course, well within the BSP's 2.2 to 4% target range, which will then, of course, give the bank the flexibility for another rate cut.
Yeah, but Trump's tariffs have pretty much complicated projections, especially when it comes to GDP for the full year, as the governor just rightfully said. So what are the chances that slower GDP would hit private consumption levels?
Well, Trump tariffs have certainly compounded the challenges faced by the Philippine economy. And we believe that Trump policy support will be crucial for achieving the government's 6% lower bound growth target. That being said, as you mentioned, Trump's tariffs certainly do pose downside risks to inflation. Although, if anything, I think the case for more easing has actually strengthened, right? But of course, if negotiations fall through, and the Philippines is indeed slapped with a 17% tariff, then we will, of course, revise our policy rate forecast to pencil in more cuts. Now, consumption-wise, the overall story will be, of course, that slower growth will affect private consumption. This is because as economic expansion decelerates, job creation and wage growth could also be affected, which then leads to a reduction in disposable incomes.
right.
This means, of course, households will face more budget constraints and increased financial insecurity.
Okay.
Consequently, consumers will then become more cautious when they spend, prioritizing essential goods and services over more discretionary purchases.
Okay, well, keep an eye out on those forecasts because, as you say, they might change. But thank you so much, Damien Yeo of BMI in Singapore.